디니레 딜라 양 다네 제 용되게 다 조자조데 케빈네 주 최기 동시 소소 양다 버리고 시 딘데 예빈나네 단다가스 바바데 케빈네 주 내주근나네 양네 담보 풍보 데라 갑라레 데네 풍보 데라 에낭 마 예빈나네 데네 담보 속이 풍보 되게 갑라레 속 데라 양 데네 입기 소당 안에 다 소풍 데라 양 데네 제 유숙 중화 첨보당 제숙 세네 근데 예배 갑니다. 네 대숙도 콜라 계제시되고 갑라니.
At the beginning of class, please give rise to bodhicitta thinking. May all sentient beings, who are as numerous as the sky is vast, be free from suffering and the causes for suffering. And in order to establish all sentient beings at the level of perfect and complete awakening, may I study Dharma and put the teachings correctly into practice. So with that kind of motivation, please listen to the teachings. The text that we're studying in this class is the Gateway to Knowledge, or the long form of the title, the treatise entitled The Gate for Entering the Way of a Pandita by Mipam Rinpoche. And the text has three main topics: the 10 topics of expertise, the 4 seals of Dharma, and the 4-fold correct discrimination. We're currently discussing the 10 topics of expertise, and within those, the first one, the aggregates. The aggregates are divided into 5 types of aggregates, out of which we're concerned with form at the moment. And form is further divided into the causal forms, the elements, and resultant forms. And we're currently in the discussion of these resultant forms.
디 갑다 아니 당공 양 지와시 네바레스 지와시 카시시레 지와데라 단 넘버를 제 마인베 소데 소 임바스타나 간데스네 하고비레스 네 넘버 딘데스 지와지레 넘버를 제 마인베 소데 소 임바데 네 데 넘버를 제 마인베 소데게 텐데라 노바치나 안에 데 넘버를 제 마인베 소데라 돈바데라 never show you and the Togam regbasing in the subsurumagi singing the ordinary tangies.
In the context of these resultant forms, we had a few questions that came up yesterday. The first one is with regard to imperceptible form. How can we say that it is form? How can we define this imperceptible form to belong to the category of form? How can we know that? And one way to look at this is that actually when we speak about imperceptible form here, so the vows, the virtuous, non-virtuous, and temporary vows, then when the support, the physical support for upholding these vows is harmed, then the vows will also dissipate. So if the support is gone, then the vows themselves are also gone. And in this sense, they are something that can be impacted, that can be come into contact with, can be destroyed by certain conditions in the physical sense. If the physical support of those vows is gone, then with it the vows will also be dissipated.
네. 다디데 안에 디 넘버를 좀 많이 변다데 가르스네 지워다나도 된다데 되네 넘버를 좀 많이 베게 다데 돈바이나라도 도미니나라도 바르도미나라도 된조데 아조게 셈라 계용이 갑데라 안에 계제기 유디기 아니 깨와 레스 남네 넘버리지 마이베 숙데 통투고요 말레스 베샤샤나도 차차 소와데 아니 돈바디 슈르와 다 돈바디 슈르에 베나 돈바도리라 삼나당나 소다 타베르게 다오당데 슈 슈차비체라 아니 슈차비체라 데 돈바디 통투고요 말에 아니 데 통마디 갑텔라 아니 데 차차발라 소바 데기 유임바니도안 야부치네 라투고요 말에 유임바 제발라 다네 da pena number check ke su daw yena pena number check ke su daw yena pena di dangong ji do de lepsa do chung chung de ge pena do chung chung de ge den ne ji dai ip daw mo ra ip daw yona ta mo ra de ge ip de ge ju de do chung de res 도충중 데 레스 데나 하고이도 도충중 데 간선 도충중 데레 때네 모자기 입데 소토바레스 도충중 데라 때네 데네 데 지데 간선나 따이 입데 통기도 다 딜라와는 신기 차찰와 당 솔와 데바 나소바 domba 슈에게 데데 내가 된 오늘 도사비체라 아니 디 domba 데 통투기요 말에 디치네 domba 인족이 규레스는 다 랍토기어 말해서 다 kin주난 다랑 송도한테 대랑 꾸니 롱제 용하게 차대 랑기 규임 바 현라리 바 메제데스 되는지 송도와 뭔데 랑기 규임 바데 답변나 창차와 당 소와데 발라소가 지와데 넘버리 제 마인 바수 코기 규임 바데 통토기어 말해서 간세나 듀 돈바스인데 넘버리 디 통토기입니다 믹셰기 de sungyo da tunda de res number je mai basan
What is then the meaning of imperceptible? Why do we call this kind of form imperceptible form? Here we identified the virtuous vowels, the non-virtuous vowels, and the temporary vowels as imperceptible form. And why do we give it this name? Why do we label it as imperceptible forms? It's because we cannot definitively say that the arisen vowel is result of the causes that go prior, because we cannot observe the result. So once one has taken the vowel, a particular vowel, like for example the individual liberation vows, once one has gone through the ritual of doing the prostrations and reciting the supplications, going for refuge, and so on, afterwards, once the vow is taken, the vow is not something that we can see. No one can see that result, the vow. So we can't really say for sure that the prostrations and supplications that someone did in the past functions as the cause for there being a vow, the result of that present now. So we can't really say that those are the causes, because the result cannot be observed. And this was illustrated by the example with the pebbles, with the little stones. If you have a lot of little stones, we can form the shape of a horse or a car from those little stones. All that we really see are these little stones. Without those, there wouldn't be a shape of a car. So we can create the picture of the car through these little stones. Sorry for that. I'm going to give up on my Wi-Fi at home from now on. So can you hear me again? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Can I have?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
But Lamala got stuck.
He's also frozen, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let me finish the translation and then we see whether he's back by the time. Okay, so going back to the pebbles, those little stones. So we can form the picture of a car or a horse from these little stones, and then we can observe the shape of the car, for example, from really just seeing the shape of those, the shape in which the stones are arranged. So without the stones, we cannot observe the shape of the car. And so once the vow is taken, once the physical and verbal actions have been performed, we cannot observe without these physical and verbal actions, we cannot observe the vow anymore. It's not visible to us. And so we can't, since we can't see that resultant form, we can also not really infer on the causes, that there were these causes that came before, that there were the prostrations, that we went through the entire ritual, because we cannot observe the result. We cannot say whether the result is present or not from looking at someone who has the vows. And so this is as if the pebbles, the little stones, were gone. And that's why we call it imperceptible, because the result, the vows, once the vows have been taken through a ritual, then afterwards we cannot observe them anymore. Okay, let's try to find Lamala now. I'm going to try to call him. Uh-oh, he's unavailable. Let's wait a couple.
The internet or the electricity.
Yeah, we don't have power here right now, so probably It's gone in Boda too, and the monastery will take a few minutes to start the generator.
Right.
Yeah. There he is.
the nap the drosong 자야돼. 지진이.
나타나요. Keep it together. That's it.
네. 데 number reach my base tanda de subla sha kyore tanda ane an chema dumtha kap dumtha pena dodepa pena samsamba umaba luksura rona kale de semla sha ge de yongere tanda kapso baba dela tanda de sugi phungbogi khongdola share de jine tade sug es tanda di dumtha di shi sha chine ge je shine rona tanda
Tata di cheta mabarto.
Tata Chirama Tang, Chirama Tang, Otindra, Mumba or Madam, Mumba Kundun, Tachirama looks so Shishara.
Yes. So here, this imperceptible form is presented as a form within the aggregate of form, and therefore it's presented as an actual form. when we look at the philosophical tenets later on, we will see that the higher philosophical schools present imperceptible form as then aspects of the mind. So the presentation that we find here about imperceptible form as an actual form, that can be said to be an explanation of the lower Abhidhamma, or specifically the presentation of the Vaibhashika. While then, if we look at the other philosophical schools, like gradually the idea about the imperceptible form will change into the view that those are actual mental aspects.
tene jembadan hishingi gone kandesene hago togeresene dero jochito tadela ta zochewa de sugla shako de kalane zochewa da lunga ge ane jembaten semgi jembaten nge ta lunga gi joba zochewa da lunga gi joba ra tanda de ane lunga ki tache lunga ki choba de la temba de nge sok che minyen la so ba lui gi mi ge che minyen nga gi mi ge che minyen sene sem gi ta me de sam minyen la do tinde gi temba dang shi shin gi tembi ko ni ta de temba de shi shin de den tembi ko ni do ko res ta temba shi shin de den tu gi re temba shi shin den tu gi re pena karsana chido ning ta karsana pena sok choba la soba tindre ke ta dumba shuira ne sok che minye sen chemba o tindre sheshin ten ni dogoro zo lunga la zo chewa do ni dogoro.
And then there was a question regarding how one can then relate to these vows if they are physical. How do if they are form, how we then can relate to them through mindfulness and conscientiousness. And so the vows that one takes, they are about, like they are physical, but the way that the mind then guards them through mindfulness and conscientiousness is that it has the motivation, I will not engage in the non-virtues that I have vowed to refrain from. So through mindfulness then there is this intention of the mind at times. I will not engage in killing because I have vowed to not kill, or I will not engage in any of the aspects of speech that I have vowed not to do. So one applies mindfulness to the objects that are actually physical and verbal, to the actions of body and speech that are aspects of physicality. So thinking, I will not kill, I will not engage in this negative action of the body, or thinking, I will not lie, I will not engage in this negative action of the speech, because one has possesses this vow, because one has taken the vow and has this imperceptible form of the vow, is then how one still, through mindfulness and conscientiousness, guards these vows.
Wang Jurbe Suk Sing Jure Sentine Songre, the Wang Jurbe Suk Shiva de Madang Zogi, Dinge Zinla, and Yavershone, Sashi Tamje, Chunidu Gomna, Gomba Tarchine, Sashi Tamje, Chunidu Tongwa de Mingla, Wang Jurwas, and that Chunidu Gombala, Sem Dokchumbo, Sem Wang Jurwas. Semdi wang rogi kecha tingye zingi nubala tenne sashi tamje yang chu nido tongwa yang sashi tamje do ngombo nido komsona yang ngombo nido tongwa o de la so wa tenne tonggenji yus ni ta de sungsha re yun namsha de yus ni.
So and then there was a question with regard to the mastered forms. Mastered forms just refers to a category, to a kind of forms that arises based on the ability or the power of meditative concentration that otherwise do not arise in this way. So the mastery here, the mastered forms, are the objects that are being perceived due to the power of one's meditative absorption. So there are, it refers to the different, to being able to perceive what one decides to. So to give rise to an object as the object of one's perception according to one's decision, having gained mastery over the mind through the power of one's meditative absorption. So for example, one might meditate on all phenomena to appear in the nature of water, and then one sees everything as water, one sees only water. That is just that object that is perceived there arises or is perceived based on having gained control of what one perceives. It's just a category of form, of a category of mental objects, that which arises, or that which is perceived based on the ability that one has gained in meditative concentration. It's just another example would be to see the totality of blue, so to see everything as being blue, because one rests in that meditative absorption of everything being blue. It's a category of phenomena that are mental objects.
Tene da deda nyamdula chwa khaga da di kalchimbo reves ne da geja she den semla wang jure de da kalchimbo da res da semla wang da di chidangi chwa da re da semla wang jure de kalchimbo yinams le do semla wang jure de kalchimbo res sem de da sem kewa shongla mambo tang tupna ani da digi ji mitse yang do kewa yang do so gyu ran de ndu semla wang jure de kechimbo res le da ina di pecha digi na pen wang jure su se gi yo res di kande res na wang jure su se tinde res ngi di sung yo wa an de da nyam du la ta da ji jiwa de kande wang jure su de yang kal chimbo yin nam sin da jiwa sin le da kal da wang jure semla wang jure sin kal chimbo res semla wang jure de kal chimbo res.
Along with the question about the mastered forms came then the question why this is important, why why we think of the control or the mastered forms as important. This is actually a really general question that it comes down to. Is the control, is this mastery of the mind important or not? And yes, generally we can say it's extremely important, because if we have the mastery to be able to control our mind and direct our mind as we want to, as we intend to, then we can focus the mind on virtue. And the more we focus our mind on virtuous aspects, the better things will be. So our life and our rebirth will just get better and better if we are able to control our mind to focus on virtue. Here then in particular, it speaks about the mastered form, so that which adheres to a mind that focuses on something specific. That is more general, that's an object of the mind. But the importance, like the important thing is not the examples that we give for what we can master ourselves in, but the fact that mastery of the mind is important.
네, 저번에 둘천대 유열다 요마레스 또 둘천대 뭐보 작바 탐제 좀 시르기 교와기 둘천지 유열레스.
And then there's a question with regard to the indivisible particles, the smallest subtle particles, do they exist or they don't? Do they not exist? Building blocks, the most fundamental building blocks that make up Horus phenomena, do exist.
Tene mutu네 당고네 말라 왕든 주고 대다 둘전 사파 임비치르세 왕봉아당 된나 민나나지 왕봉아 민나나지 류 이제 왕봉아 네 소다 지로 렉자데 된나 데데나나니 주고 대다스 다둘 차라 차세 에와 메와다 디엔라 아니 충도 땅에 메와기 때문에 그 둘텐 데 중중제 어떤데 싹바리 예배치나 아니 속탐제다 속라바 된 쪽이 탐제기 단다 다 속이 풍부시리가라 속수롱마 속이 속수롱마 도마봉마데 속이 풍부이치니라 데다 속된 쪽이 탐아데 나 차와 차랍슨 둘 차랍슨 차된 애주메바 디엔라 디니 말라다 충도 자원이 당주메와 된들라 참에서 차 자원이 애주메와 참에게 둘 충중중이래스 딜레 잠데 아니 제제 수주르데스 제제스나 데니 칼레칼야 망보 게존이 둘 차우니샤 니레 숨나 게 첨보차 숨레 시시레 어디는 망망 차도와 체르체르도 와들 어디는 제제 수주르데스 간데르스네 람나 시다르나 세 간데르스 람나 돌 차랍스네 다 충충만에 탑토바데미나 돌 차랍라브라 디돌 차랍데 든든수 루룩소나 든루룩소나 데밍라 돌첸직 제네 된데 자오스 대신도세 든규르기스네 람나 든든든존에다 단다 돌 차랍 든라 아니 돌첸직 랍소아 대나시 든든지인스 강강데지인 람나 짝세 짝 다 둘첸 된라 짝이 둘제 짝둘 양 디도 든 탐바 점송나 양 축이 둘제 축이 둘데 든 탐바 점송나 양 제봉기 부되게 다 수로지 제게 수 충충도지 아디든 총소나 양 룩기 부게 제게 데 돈보디라지 양디 든총 수 점송나 두나 수 두송나 아니 랑기 빡빡이 아니 랑기 부게 되네 제되게 지 돌로지 어땠느냐 제셔 체로 어땠느냐 좀 규율에서 담당돼.
So if we now continue from where we have left off yesterday, we are on the bottom of page 20 in the paragraph 1.21. Because of being a conglomeration of particles, the 10 faculties and the objects are composites made of the ultimately smallest form, that is to say, gatherings of the most subtle and partless atoms. So any of the aspects, the 10 resultant forms, when we speak about the perceptible forms, being the 5 faculties, the eye faculty, the ear faculty, the nose faculty, the tongue faculty, and the body faculty, or their respective objects, the 5 sense objects of form, sound, smell, taste, and texture, touch, tangible objects. And then all of those are made up from these smallest indivisible particles, so the ultimately smallest types of forms that, when coming together, then build up more and more coarse kind of phenomena. So any kind of form, anything that belongs to the aggregate of form, especially the resultant form that I've just enumerated, they are made up they can be broken down further and further until we reach the smallest indivisible particles, the most fundamental building blocks for those. And as these smallest indivisible particles then accumulate, as they are heaped together, the phenomena will grow in size, in dimension. So we have one particle, one indivisible particle, and then another indivisible particle, and then a third one. So gradually it builds up until many indivisible particles will be will appear as a more coarse phenomena. So how does it work? How do we identify, or how do we say that these particles then build up, these indivisible particles? We actually speak about different stages or different sizes. When 7 of the most subtle indivisible particles are joined together, then this makes one particle. So now we are on page 21, paragraph 1.22. 7 most subtle atoms joined together are called one particle. So that is then one general particle, not the most subtle indivisible particle anymore, but one particle. And then the way that more and more coarse, or more and more dimensionally coarse or bigger phenomena arise, or the size of those is then identified by always multiplying 7 by 7. So 7 most indivisible particles make up a particle. Then 7 of these particles make up the size of the iron particle. Multiplying it by 7 results in a measure called the iron particle. 7 iron particles are 1 water particle, and so on upwards to the rabbit particle, the sheep particle, the cow particle, and so on. So 7 particles then make up this iron particle, 7 iron particles make up the water particle, 7 water particles make up then the size of rabbit hairs, like it's a very small unit. It's the size of a rabbit hair. So just the tip of a rabbit hair. That's multiplied by 7. 7 of those make up the particle that is called the sheep hair, and so on until we reach the hair of a cow.
니서기 돌당 세다 랑기 돌랑기 부대게 제디게 돌 차오차오 둔레 한 니서기 돌당 데 둔레 니서기 돌 시와데 나랑소 개공체위 갑라 양나 고체위 갑데네야라 니마 데티깔라 니마 강반낭라 돌 충중충주여가 통이다 원데면 니서기 돌당 디타우 니서기 돌둔 용성나 양 소마기 체 소마게 체 둔마 점성나 양식 기체 대식 둔 저추나는 내당 다나신 아니 내게 둔 저지 되게 점성나는 나장조 단다 주국이 체도 소모기 체기 파도라오 되스네 좀 용게래 센티는 소모델라 소모 니슈츠시 델라 아니 추강스네 되스네 라기스 추시델라 아니 슈돔 라기스 추시여나 안디 체디게 명라 추시 창송나 데명라 슈돔 강스 라기스 야는 슈돔데 납자 탐바 창송나 슈돔 납자 되게 민글라 아니 경차치기 체세 파 경차치기 체스네 람나 슈돔 납자 되라 비레스 슈돔 납자 경차스 아니 데이터게 경차 세 되서 야데 경차시비 체데 타릉동게 경차 제도지 중 창송나 아니 박세지 진네 라비에스 맞아 남준의 박세 사샤 박사치기 바둘라 박세니기 바둘라 데 박세데 아니 경차 제 창소나 박세지 그래스 데 박세데라 세밤이더니 박세되기 아니 리링 속에 체자버 제도 선디 윤데 갈라데네 리페나 잠링나 리망보 아니 디나네 강 템페나양 리 갈보리랍스네 지에라네 단단가도 로 잠볼링 라도 양 티양 지링 노 발랑체 라도 링 망보여라네 갸초 망보여레 갸초 된조당 어된조 탐제기 체데 어디네스텐데스네 박세 샤테네 박세 가수도 스네 어디네스네 지네다 딘네 도비여레스 다 된조 지단 된조 양치마 지지나 오늘 얘기를 때면은 양나지 최문바 조된조 나나데네 데제 자보리랍게 박세 가수여레 콜라니 링텐조라 체간데로 딘조스네 몽고지여라 딘조 최상데 고당보 아니 고축사데 다 어디네스네 레표레스야 둘차람네 야라 도네 안데네 박세 보도를 쓰이데 박세 되기 보내든 세갑니다 박세 가수도 박세 동 가수도 지자보리랍라 박세 베나 제티도 여바도 계자 당한신 링당 된조 링텐 된조라 박세 잘당 된조 어디네스 용기에 송네 박세 잘바르체도
Multiplying then the cow particle by 7, the size of this cow hair, the particle that is of the size of the cow hair, then leads to the sunbeam particle. And that's something we can actually observe with our eyes then. When we open the window or if we open the door, then the sunlight might hit certain particles, and that we see then this glimmering. Those are the sunbeam particles, the size of sunbeam particles. Then comes the size of a louse egg. If 7 of those are combined, 7 louse eggs then make the size of a louse. 7 of those make the barley grain, and 7 particles of the size of barley grains, or something that has the dimension, the size of a barley grain, 7 of those then make a finger width. So these are units of measurement of size based on the accumulation of the smallest indivisible particles. And 24 finger widths then make up 1 cubit. And you have to say that the Tibetan measurements are, of course, not exactly the same measurements as in the Western, the cubits and so on, but roughly it correlates. So 24 finger widths are 1 cubit, 4 cubits make 1 fathom, and 500 fathoms then make something like a mile. And 8 miles then make 1 league. And a league is then the measurement in which the Abhidhamma measures all the mountains and the continents. So there are all sorts of mountains in this world, but this also refers to measuring then Mount Meru, for example, and the continents. So the 4 continents and their respective the side continents. So these, all the measurements for the way that the Abhidhamma presents the world of the Mount Meru and the continents in the 4 directions, that is then counted in leagues. Maybe this will come in some detail in later on in the text. Otherwise, it's in the Abhidhamma Kosha. We find explanations of how many leagues the Mount Meru is, and what the dimensions and the distances in the world system of Mount Meru and the continents are. So that's all measured in leagues then.
네, 디체라양 도캄나 왕보당 자메베 둘 강라양 중시당 수티 로 레게 둘게스 다 도캄라 다 왕보라 메게 왕보라 낭도롱도 줄와라 낭롱도 줄와 데라페나 아네 둘제 계승이 지에 요레스 둘제 계데 요레스 라 둘제 계데 베나 가르스나 중화침보시 사주멜롱 세 중화침보시 사주멜롱 중화시 디땡돌라 소티 로 렉자스 데레신 계데 참데레스 지단기다 데레신 둘제 계도 그네 상대교스 라베타 베나 쪽제도 베나와 베나카와 봄바도 된절라 디둘제 계스 둘제 계 상대를 되니 둘제 계 참여 양디 둘제 계 요마체 자유나 자둘당 구스 자유나서는 베나 나지도 와데 초반나 동에게 나지 디 나데 나데 마동나 당망엘라 둘제 계데 요데레 코 중화시 요데레 소티로 레게 요데레 나데 동송나 자지데 비라디 자당세네 안에 배차샤나데 양 구더양 용기레스 둘제 구치 양 대대당 신양 루왕유나 안에 디 둘당 주스 루왕디 둘당 주스 류용부디 둘당 주스 벤나 제 락바도제도 락바데 안에 류용부 요와 제 락바데 양 락바니 인데스네 락바니 동나 안에 달리기라 야페나 주고디 인데 세kul도나 달리기라 디치네 락바콘 류용바다 지 드라임바다 니 아니 디땡도 니디땡도라 중화침보시 조치 안디땡도라 소티로 렉자 디시는데 양 둘째 주스 주 창조되는 용기레스
In the desire realms, the 8 types of particles consisting of the 4 primary elements and the 4 properties of form, order, taste, and textures are always present. The particles of the sense faculties and of sound are not counted because they are not always present. When a sound is present, then the presence of sound particles makes 9. If the body is present, then the presence of the particle of its faculty makes 10 particles. So, in the desire realm, when there is something that can be observed, that we can see, that appears as an appearance in the desire realm, if it's something that is suitable to appear to the eye faculty, then it automatically means that there are at least 8 particles present there. So 8 particles together make up this, what appears as form in the desire realm. So we always have the 4 elements, the particles which are the causal forms present. So there's always a earth, water, fire, and wind particle. And on top of that, in order for something to be something visible, then we also have form particles, odor or smell particles, tastes, and textures present. So all of these together makes 8 particles that make up something that is perceptible in the form realm. So if we have a table, for example, or a vase or a pillar, So that's something that we perceive, that phenomena in the desire realm, and that has at least these 8 kinds of particles. When sound is present on top of that, so if you have an object, like for example a drum, then as long as we don't hit it, the drum itself is made up of these 8 kinds of particles. So again, the 4 elements and the and form, order, taste, and texture. But if we then hit the drum and it resounds, then there's a 9th kind of particle, which is then sound. So that's also present, but that's only present if we hit the drum, not otherwise. And when there is the body faculty also involved, then that's a 10th kind of particle. So, for example, when we clap our hands or if we snap our finger, there's the body faculty involved in the production of the sound, and always also the 8 other kinds of particles, and therefore we come up with a number of 10 different kinds of particles that are present at the time when we snap our finger or clap our hands.
양 둘chen chao den zomne 양 딘데게 둘 공부 딘데 카시 양 이제 제주 딘데 여기 딘데 요래선다 제주래 옛날 요 말이다. 다 제주 여기 딘데 배나 젤레데 그런 류기 원고 임베 젤레데 류기 원고 남나 임베 책 안에 젤레기 다다오지 렘나 젤레기 다도 잡나 다담 니 안디 강나양 젤레 코롱나 중화시양 창대열에 안에 중화시 창대가라 시쟁나 조제 안디 톡데라양 안에 소티로 렉자 어떤데스네 nemne양 신 원보 신유나 류왕 대당 현지 예배 류용보단 현지 예배 돌메다와 축지양 예도스 젤레 류용보 젤레 다 아니 수다티로 렉자 아니 중화침보시 디로 죽지 담바여스.
So if any of the other faculties are present, then there are 11 different types of particles due to the faculty being coexistent with the body faculty. So if we have something, another sense faculty present, then that will lead to a counting of 11 different particles. So, for example, if the tongue faculty is involved, then the particles that make up the tongue, the physical organ of the tongue, are present. So the 4 elements, and form, order, taste, and texture as the most basic building blocks. Then sound that is produced by the tongue, by clicking it, for example, and also the tongue sense source, sense faculty. So it's the tongue that is then the 10th particle, but the tongue faculty always comes along also with the body faculty. None of the sense faculties is separated from or can be present without the body faculty also being present, and therefore that makes then the number of 11 particles, kinds of particles that are present at that time.
근데 다티 엔체디기 베나 제 수기 풍보들의 에나 풍보 나요라 풍보들의 에나 나 수기 풍보 소리 풍보 나서거든요 나요변하네 수기 풍보대 슈사레스 수기 풍보들라 주데 아니 중화침보 시당 제속 축직세 왕봉아 슈사레 아니 되는가데 속다 지로 적자데 슈신데 안에 제 원바즈다나 넘버 적제 많이 비속선 디 슈사레 원바 군두 다나 최기 개체 바이 속디 향는 죽진인선데 최기 개체 바이 속래나 나스네 텐데제네 슈신바레 텐딘냠돌라다데 둘차랍기 고네 뭐보 장당된 조고 라양지 텐데 숭숭되네 디 돌데 잠사비 젤라테네 네 돌제 망쇼데 죽직담바 중교 대마 돌제 주 돌제 구 돌제 게데 예스 탐제라 테네 갑갑디 강라 냄송나 돌제 고당 주당 아니 텐데 죽직두게스네 텐텐데스네다 속이 콜라 인데스네 수 공부 찍고래 스네 찍고로 짐바요나 다 찍고디 가인데레도 중화침보 시대레 당 속색인데 다 왕봉아데레 당 되는아데레 당 되네 이제 넘버를 많이 배속되레 당 야나데 최기 개체 바이 속되레 당다 둘차랍래 에나 양 가인데레 박세데레 당 경타데레 당 추강데레 당 소르모데레 당 데디네 말라 차루 당네 속세한테 가인데레스네 다 데레스네 속 차고 찍고 진여나 따오 데레스네 찍고 진여데 도가야게 체도라 레센 사단이야 강라 가상 숭숭한 때 풍고라 로중 지괴데 오 데레스네 다 찍고 진바데 도가야게 된다라다 데네 에와망보 땅네 다지 군족인 데네 에와 고망보라 네 대요바데 오 데레 군다다 숭난 레스
What we have here now seen so far is the first of the 5 aggregates. So we're currently discussing the aggregates, and first comes the aggregate of form, first of the 5. And we have completed the discussion of the subdivisions of form, speaking first about the causal forms, the 4 elements, and then the resultant forms, which are the 5 sense faculties, the 5 sense objects, and then the 11th kind of form, which was in the Abhidhamma Kosha explained as to be this imperceptible form, and then the Abhidhamma Samuccaya as the mental objects, as the Dhamma sense sources. And there were 5 of these 5 kinds. And we have now also seen how everything can be broken down into this smallest, in any kind of form can be broken down in these indivisible, most subtle indivisible particles, and how these particles make up the 4 kinds of forms. So we said that a minimum of 8 kinds of particles are present when something is perceptible, and then depending on what is perceived, that might also include the sound particle and the faculties particles. And we saw how the smallest indivisible particles, when they accumulate, then make up these other measures of size of these different kinds of particles, up to the leagues. And so this discussion really, if we think about it thoroughly, counteracts a belief that there is one singular body, that there's form per se. If one holds the belief that there is form as such, that there is a thing that's form, then we can ask where this form lies. This aggregate of form, or like this form, like is just an aggregation of many different things. So we ask, where is form? What do we identify as form? Is it just the causal forms, or does it only refer to the resultant forms? If it's one of those, then if it's resultant forms, then does it refer to the sense faculties only? And even if one would believe that form would be the sense faculties, then, and that would be singular, then we can break it down into different kinds of faculties. And so breaking it down further and further, we can see that we can never find this one thing that's called form as one kind of one solid kind of thing, of form. So it's an analysis of what we might think of as form, and breaking down into the different categories to counteract any notion of a singular form. And in that sense, we have been seeing that it really breaks down further and further and further, and there's not one singular thing that we can point towards to be form per se, but it's these different accumulations, it's different coming together, joining together of different kinds of particles, these indivisible particles, and therefore any notion that there is a singular thing that's called form will dissipate, or a singular body.
네, 디 슈사비치라 니바 초르와 풍보데 콜라 계제슈나 네 초르와네 초르와 시와데 컨데치라 인세나 냠수 용웨 체녜첸스 다율 냠수 용팽게 율데라 안에 대화 동알 땅뇽 강롱기 초도라 용팽게 체녜첸 지금행라 초르와스나 비오레스 율데 통네 율데 렉네 율데 지마다오지 칸네 율데 자데 년네 안티게 대화 동알 당용도 용해 냠수 용해 지글라 아니 초로와스 마티다오 초로와데니 냠수 용해 체녜체노스 대독 당용수 용해게 냠수 용해게 체녜지기 딘데기 뭐 정신다오 지글라 초로와스네
So having completed then the first aggregate, we move on to the second one, which is the aggregate of sensations. And what are sensations? Sensations are defined as impressions. So it's that which experiences the objects in terms of sensations that are either pleasurable, painful, or neutral. Any kind of sensation that falls into these categories of pleasure, pain, and neutrality is identified as as a part of the aggregate of sensation. So here it's translated as sensations are defined as impressions. Impressions meaning it's the experience. Sensations are that which is the experience of the specific object. So whether it's the pleasure, pain, or neutrality by encountering that object of sight, so form, or touch, or smell, or sound, all these impressions, all the coming into contact with the objects, the reaction, the experience that one has in terms of pleasure, pain, or neutrality, that's sensation.
디도 초르와 풍보된다 에나서 다 풍보서는 다 사카상네 야강나지 슈스마 대 마운 다다기 속이나라도 속 녀오 속 타릉보 속 상보 속 냠바 속 체와 속 충충 되네 속 망보 속 뇽뇽 대라서보다는 속이 꼴라 망보 지켜져서 대 세상면은 속이 풍보 라와 난신진네 다 들어 초로와 될라양 초로와 약보 초로와 도보 초로와 땅뇽 되네 룽바 셴게 초로와 룽바 대게 초로와 베나 로zam불링기 미든족이 초로와 아니 노발랑족이 미든족이 초로와도 다는 신기 ngama 대비 초로와 다다비 초로와라서 다 수풍불라 자르와 낭신진이 다 두루양 다 되는 자리로 풍불라디 갑라 망보지 풍유베게 자로라도 초로와 탐제라베게 자로지도와 때 초로 풍보 될라다 ngo군이 에나 산다 에나 ngo군이 에나 다 고롱 랑신 임반 인당데 간데질라 뒤데라나 초로와 대와 초로와 동알 초로와 땅뇽sen 다데 숨나라 뒤데여세다 초로와 다 대양 안에 지 페나 안에 속 다우지라다 속 다우지라 지 미게 통용데 갑데라 되네 통와당 딱제 땅네 안에 율코롱기 속 제오 다우지 통송나 안에 속 야갈라 삼베 야포기 안에 야갈라 삼베 야포기 삼로지 깨네 야포스는 용청나 안에 디밍라다 속 대와라 용와센 속 대와센 속 대위 초와센 다 초와 대와 속 야갈라센 속 대양 지 마제와 다우지 통송나 아니 속 마제와 삼바 다우지 되네 된데스네 마제비 초와 다우지 되네 dinyi kaya mayna tangyum dawji o tendesne legere sungane tatate miki kone peshante dana shin nenchoge dranyanna ane traji nyen trade tang wangbo denzo tang tendesne tok tene sheba tang denzo tamje tokne ane trade ke kecho de ta trape nyembo daw trakurun kecho nyembo dawji yo sungna tene di nyembo sambade tene sambade ngundu gyurne nyembo데 nyembo도 sen nyongwarchena tene de tra dewas te tra de yang nenchola ko nenjogi sheba da nyamdula tu tene yang tra de ji yedu mewa do tra manyeba do jongsona ani tra manyeba do de mundu gyurne tra manyeba o sen nyongna tra nyembo mido sen nyongna tra tungal ani tinni kaya manyeba do ji nyongge나 당뇽 다는 신기 아니 젤레 강라 로데 젤레 강라 사마데 젤레 옹보당 율 사마당 삼로데 숨촉네 렉 지응데 갑데라 아니 코롱기 케바데 히 용겨래 젤레기 셰바데기 셰네 데네 조아 야고도 삼나 조아 이동와 대화 초로와 대화 지겨래 야고 선네 초로와 심지 조아 야고도 오시나 아니야 세 마신버 더위나 아니 제 초로와 동알도 초로와 동와 셈 마가와도 지게 그래 데 딩이 가야 많이 바꿔가 땅뇽도 오 다는 신게 메기 셰바 넘버 셰바 nenchoki 넘버 셰바 나이 넘버 셰바 첼레 넘버 셰바 류기 넘버 셰바 텐졸라양 아니 대와 동알 땅뇽 신데스에 요레스 다는 신게 얘기 예라양 지 삼로딘데 당 초로와딘데 레용데가라양 얘기양 대화 동알 당용 신신에다 된데스는 지에 요여도 숨네 당고군에는 초로와데 대화 동알 당용 숨모 숨
The aggregate of sensation can be divided into three: pleasant, painful, and neutral. Alternatively, there are five: pleasure and mental pleasure, pain and mental pain, and neutral sensations. So here we then speak again about the aggregate of sensation, and we already discussed what aggregates refer to. We said that aggregates are the heaping together, the aggregation, the bundling together of many different things. And we looked at this by the example of form. We said that all sorts of forms fall into the category of the aggregates of form. So whether it's any kind of form of the past, present, or future, or whether it's any form that is close to us or something that is far away, any nice form or any not nice form, anything small, big, many kinds of forms together, or more dispersed kinds of forms, all of those fall into the category, into the aggregated form. They're aggregated together. They're taken together because of their common characteristics to belong to the same kind, to the kind of the aggregated form. And the same kind of principle then also holds true for sensation. All types of sensations, everything that's of the kind that belongs to the same principle of sensation falls into the aggregate of sensations. So whether it's sensations that are pleasurable, painful, or neutral, whether it's sensations that are experienced here or somewhere far away, whether it's on this continent or another, all of them are taken together as the aggregate of sensation because they all are of the same kind, of the same, following the same principle. And so we can divide the aggregate of sensation into three different kinds. There are pleasant, painful, and neutral sensations. So these are three categories that all types of sensations fall into. So there are pleasurable sensations. We experience all kinds of sensations that are pleasurable based on our positive reaction to an encounter of an object that we like, that we think of as being something we want to experience. Something that's good, something that delights us. So the experience, the sensation that arises when we encounter something that we think of as nice, beautiful, delightful, then this is pleasure. That is the pleasant sensation. It's a pleasant sensation. Other things we might not want to encounter, that when we meet certain objects, we think of these objects as being terrible, as being ugly, as something we don't want to have around us. We don't want to experience those kinds of objects. We have an aversion against them, and they make us sad, or we have aversion against them. We don't ever want to experience these objects. And that is then any sensation that arises based on encountering objects that we don't like is then the category of painful or unpleasant sensations. And then there are others where we don't have any particular judgment about them. We don't have any particular idea. We don't think of them as either beautiful or ugly. We don't think of them as being something that delights us, nor that makes us develop aversion against it. So those kinds of, when we encounter those kinds of objects, then this is neutral. That's a neutral sensation. So if we take the experience, the sensation that arises based on encountering objects of the eye as an example, then when the eye faculty comes into contact with some particular form, then cognition arises, the eye cognition arises, or the eye consciousness arises. And that eye consciousness might think of the object that is being perceived as being nice, as being something beautiful, or something that one wants to keep experiencing. And the feeling, the sensation that comes from that encounter as a mental state is then the pleasurable, or the sensation of pleasure, of being pleasant. It's a pleasant sensation. While if there is something that we don't like to see, something that we think we don't ever want to see, so if the cognition of an object that we don't want to see arises, and the mind thinks, no, something I really don't like, this is something I really want to stay clear from encountering in the future, that's aversion that comes from the sensation of pain, or being like a painful sensation, or an unpleasant sensation. And the same, and then there are other forms that do not bring about any of these reactions that we neither want to avoid nor experience all the time, or experience repeatedly, and those are then just neutral sensations. So we don't have any particular pain or pleasure when encountering these objects. And the same then holds true for the other sense experiences too. When we encounter a melodious sound, something that we think is a very beautiful sound, then the sensation that arises based on that encounter of the sound with the ear faculty that listens to the sound, and arising cognition, if that consciousness experiences the sensation of pleasure, then it's a sign that one likes that object, the sound. Or there's a horrible sound, then the sensation would be pain, would fall into the category of painful or unpleasant sensations. Same when we eat something. If we eat something really tasty, then the cognition identifies all the particularities of this taste and comes to the conclusion that it either likes this taste or it doesn't like the taste. If it's something tasty, it thinks of it as something very delicious. And the feeling of the sensation that comes along with that encounter, that arises from that encounter with something that we consider as delicious, is pleasure. While if we have to eat something disgusting, then the sensation is unpleasant or painful. So in this sense, we also have either attachment, or we desire something, or aversion against certain kinds of tastes, or we don't care, taste that is neither pleasurable or unpleasurable. Now I ran out of data. So if there is anything that we think of as being tasty, then that's an object that, when encountered by the tongue faculty, leads to a sensation of pleasure, and then this attachment or desire arises from that. If something is disgusting, if we think of something as being disgusting, and that kind of food meets with our tongue consciousness, then we have an unpleasant sensation, and that is then leads them to aversion against that food. And so it is the cognition. It is the cognition that experiences the sensations of pleasure, pain, or neutrality. So it's the mind's feelings, the mind's sensations.
Dene yang de chorwa de nyongdang la yang megi number shepa, nawi number shepa, nai number shepa, che number shepa, lyugi number shepa. Dende goni nyungi kaptela ane dige kordo jungwa ge di chorwa de nyungi kaptela kongai shepa ge kordo jungwe di chorwa de kewi kaptela 대화스 양 얘기 쉐바되게 라테네 데네 초르와 이 대화를 받들라 나는 이데스 다가는 신기 공의 넘버 쉐바 되게 송네 뒤뒤 안에 초르와 안에 동al 신대서나 뒤 동al스 얘기 넘버 쉐바 되게 송위 고네 안에 초르와 지 동al 신대서나 뒤면라 이미데스 딘데스네 야 가능성 공의 쉐바당 얘기 쉐바 공의 쉐바당 얘기 쉐바 딘데게 콜 도단게 고네 공아대당 양 얘기 쉐바 맥나나지 류제 공하기 넘버 쉐바대당 양 얘기 쉐바 딘데게 초로한 용단게 고네 안에 대화당 이대 동알당 이미대 딘데 뉴스 체화당 안된서 탐제라 양 초로와 땅뇽바제나 땅뇽바스네 데델람냥 초라데라 안에 데 코르도 도당저기 보니 에와당나 공의 셰바기 코르도 요게 초라 대화 동al 땅뇽숨도당 안데데네 이기 셰바기 코르도 요바 데네 대화 동al 땅뇽숨 데데 요비코네 대화당 이데 동al당 이미데 땅뇽숨 데데 나오스 데데 나라 에와이스 숨제
Alternately, there are 5: pleasure, mental pleasure, pain, and mental pain, and neutral sensation. So there's another way of breaking down the presentation of, or the aggregate of sensation into 5 types. And that is based on distinguishing between the sensations that arise from the sense doors and and from the mind faculty. So the pleasure that is experienced by the eyes consciousness, the ear consciousness, the nose consciousness, the tongue consciousness, and the body consciousness based on the encounter of the objects with the respective faculties then refers to pleasure, while the positive sensation, the pleasurable sensation that is experienced by the mind consciousness then is identified here as mental pleasure. The same principle holds true then for pain and mental pain. So pain here refers to the pain that is experienced by the sense consciousnesses that arises based on the encounter of the object with the 5 doors, so the senses. And so any kind of unpleasant sensation experienced by the sense consciousnesses then refers to pain, while the unpleasant sensation of the mind consciousness and by encountering its specific mental objects then is identified as mental pain. And each of them can also be neutral. So the sense consciousnesses or the mind consciousness can also experience neutral sensations. And so in this way, we can break down the aggregate of sensation into 5 types as well, if we distinguish between the sense doors, so the senses, and the sense consciousnesses compared to the mind consciousness.
네, 땡기 왕도 제나 맥나 나제 류 얘기 되대 렉발레 중미 처와 투스 되대 렉발레 중와셈 땡기 왕도 제나 되대 렉바스리가라 페나 맥라 페샤나 왕보 맥 페나 율데 페나 붐바 아네 셈 디숨 촉네 렉발레스 디숨 촉네 렉네 중에 안에 서로와지 레비ュ레스 다는 신기 아니 년초라 배샤나 년초 아니 왕보데 년초 되네 율데 다 아니 셰바 디숨총네 디 레발레 중양 서로와지 중기유레스 다는 신나지 류이 된도 탐제 아니 율도 왕보 숨 뒤네 레발레테네 양 서로와스네 다는신 미게 서로와 아니 미게 아니 속라 아니 서로와 아니 나게 자게 서로와 아니 제게 서로와 로이츠와 렉자 아니 최 서로와스네 데 서로와 독데 중계유레스 숨마레 독당스 아니 디 서로와 된소 레레라 양 미기 속데라 서령데깔라 속 야보 요소나 서로와 대화 속데 야보 메와 다오시나 서로와 동말과 대 땅념 라오이나 땅념기 서로와 라소과데 두과라 서로와 대화 동말 땅념 대화 동말 땅념들의 레레라 디로 숨숨숨 잘네 에베 녀월 규비 서로와 안에 좁게 되네 독숨 좁게 안 되네서 유로스.
In terms of the support, there are the 6 sensations resulting from contact, involving the meeting of sense-object faculty and consciousness of either eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind. When dividing those 6 in terms of pleasure, pain, and indifference, there are 18 types of sensations accompanying a cognitive act. So if we distinguish then sensations based on the support for the sensations to arise, then we can identify that there are the cognitions or the consciousnesses, the experiences and the sensations that arise from the coming together of the sense object, the sense faculty, and the consciousness. So, for example, if there is form as the object, then the sense faculty as, like the eye faculty as the faculty, and cognition. If these 3 things are present, if the cognition arises, then the feeling, the sensation, as an according sensation arises. And that holds also true for the other senses. For the ear, if there's a sound, if there's the ear faculty and cognition, then the sensations that are based on the experience of sound, cognition of sound, will arise. Like there will be a sensation, and so on. That holds true for all of the 5 sense cognitions, the sense consciousnesses, as well as the mind consciousness. When always the object, the faculty, and the cognition are present, are the causes that come together, then a sensation, either a sensation of sight, a sensation that arises based on sound, a sensation that arises based on smell, taste, touch, or a mental state object, then arises. And each of them can be either good, bad, or neutral. So we can either encounter a form or a sound or a smell that we identify as nice, and that's then the sensation that arises with it is pleasure, or something that's not nice, that's then pain, or something that's neutral, that we don't have either aversion or attachment towards, and that's then the neutral sensation. But so we can break down each of the sense experiences into pleasurable, painful, or neutral, and that then leads to the count of 18 types of sensations that accompany a cognitive act.
그래서 늘 참시하고 모함을 나눠나.
So let's stop here for today, and so please dedicate and make the aspiration prayer.
jambalambawe chindara jemba dangundo sambo deyan deshen de da gunje jesu dalo chikewa de da tamje ramdu mo du somai shebe jalwa tamje ji ngowa kan chondo ngaba de dage gebe zawa de gwen jang sambo jechin rando ngobara je sanam de ye tamje seba ni tomne nyebe janam pamjen 제가 나체 발라 초바 예세베 소레 로와 돌로와 쇼 개와 데예 제오 콘소남 예셰 초조 신소남 예셰 레종와 담바 군예 도바라 쇼 로추소 조와라 첸제 라도소 쳬람도 조와라 첸제 라도스 남출바 셀와라 첸제 라도소 출바 예시소 샤와 첸제 라도소 나소나
Lasso to do.
진지체나
So I forgot to ask the question again. What was the topic that we completed today? Is today's question. What topic did we complete today?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
For,
I see most of you in just a little bit less than an hour. So
Thank
see you in a bit.
you.
Does anyone have a particular question? Otherwise, I'm going to hang up and going to get lunch. Yes, Dorota. You're muted. I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you. You're muted.
Me? You're talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Ja. Mir geht's gut.
No, not Ute. Dorota. But nice to see you. Dorota, your hand is raised. There's a little microphone next in your hoverbar, and you're muted. So if you have a question. If you move your mouse, there's a camera, then there's the microphone, and then no. Thank you. I don't know how to show you, but I cannot unmute you, sadly. You have to do that yourself. So in the hoverbar, if you move your mouse, there's the camera, and then there's the mute button, and the mute button is crossed out. So if you click that, oh, Doesn't work? Well, maybe later. Yeah. If you want to ask something, just send me a message. Okay. Okay, then if there's nothing else, I'm gonna go. Okay. See you all later or tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Ah.